So a few months ago, Crow Country was released to pretty much universal acclaim from both critics and fans of the survival horror genre alike. The game was praised for its evocative art style that seemed designed solely with the intention of evoking memories of games released during the PS1 era. I mean, if you got to this arcade area in Crow Country and didn't immediately think of FF7 upon seeing the basketball machine, well, it probably means your childhood sucked. Praise was also heaped upon the game's puzzle and level design, which was very reminiscent of early games from the survival horror genre like Resident Evil or Alone in the Dark. Crow Country also had a fun protagonist in the form of Mara, and a relatively interesting story that had a surprising twist that even managed to catch me off guard. Everyone seemed to adore Crow Country, and it quickly became one of the biggest indie darlings of 2024. I, however, was far less impressed. I should point out up front that I was given a review code for Crow Country at launch, which I was super grateful for considering the small size of my channel, and I had every intention of creating a review for the game. However, upon completing Crow Country for the first time, I came away a little disappointed and just decided not to review the game at all. These guys were nice enough to give me a review code. I wasn't just going to shit on their game. However, a month or so later, the developers added a hard mode to Crow Country, and almost overnight, the game went from being an underwhelming survival horror that I had no intention of ever playing again, to one of my favourite horror games of all time. But for me to explain why Crow Country became such an engaging experience, I need to quickly cover the myriad issues I had with the game at launch. Keep in mind, these are just my thoughts, and I don't expect everyone to agree with me. Also, if you are looking for a more in-depth video on all of hard mode's changes, I highly recommend checking out Under the Mayo's video, as he goes more in depth than I really have time for here. Crow Country, for all its faults, made one of the best first impressions on me when I booted the game up at launch. This game is just so damn beautiful. I never thought a game created in 2024 would be able to so effortlessly recreate the look and feel of a PS1 game, but they fucking nailed it. It's so convincing, in fact, that I've even seen people online claim that they thought the game was using pre-rendered assets. And while that obviously isn't the case, since the game features a rotatable 3D camera, the environments are so painstakingly designed to look like something from Resident Evil or Final Fantasy. I'm not surprised some people came to that conclusion. I also love how every room in Crow Country just feels like a handcrafted diorama. I wanted to reach out and touch the game at several points. It's that aesthetically pleasing. I also love how well Crow Country's soundtrack fits the cutesy aesthetic the game is going for. Sure, at times the music can be a bit eerie, but most of the time it settles in this nice middle ground that straddles the line between being lighthearted and creepy. It's fantastic. Also, can I just mention how fucking inspired having a theme park as the main setting for your game is? I'll admit to having a very love-hate relationship with theme parks. On one hand, roller coasters are probably my favourite thing in the world, but on the other hand, last year I had to spend a few €100 on new glasses as my previous pair flew off my face while I was on the Cuchulainn roller coaster, and I believe they may have smacked the child in the face behind me, but thankfully he's going to be just fine. Crow Country is a small game. I can't imagine there's any more than 50 individual rooms in the entire game. However, setting Crow Country in a theme park allows the game to have an insane amount of environmental variety within a very small map. Every area of the theme park is unique and fun to explore, and I was always excited to see what would come next. I also have to praise the monster design in Crow Country, as I don't think I've ever seen creatures this creatively grotesque since the early Silent Hill games. However, that's where most of my praise for the initial release of Crow Country ends, as very quickly I discovered that this game probably wasn't being aimed at old school survival horror fans like myself. Within the first few seconds of starting Crow Country, you are tasked with removing a padlock that is stopping you from entering the Crow Country amusement park. You look around for something to bash the lock open with, but to no avail. However, upon checking Mara's boot, or trunk, or whatever the fuck you call it, you will find a box of handgun ammunition. With this ammo, you can reload your handgun and blow that lock straight off. A simple yet effective introduction to some of Crow Country's more rudimentary mechanics. However, once you blow off the padlock, that box of ammunition does not disappear. In fact, it never disappears, thereby giving the player an unlimited supply of handgun ammunition with which to take out every single enemy in the game if they so choose. The issue I have with this is that ammo conservation and avoiding combat with enemies unless absolutely necessary is a core component of survival horror game design. You are not supposed to have enough ammunition to gun down everything that moves in these games. It gets worse, however, in that even if you are a good distance away from your car, there are trash cans littered everywhere in the game that will happily resupply you with ammunition or even healing supplies if you are running a bit low. You will simply never be low on healing items or ammunition for your weapons on the standard difficulty setting. And if somehow all that still isn't enough for you, there is even a vending machine that will shit out an unlimited supply of ammunition and healing supplies if you ever run low. So when you take all that stuff into account, I think it's fair to say that Crow Country simply isn't a survival horror game, at least on its normal difficulty setting. Survival horror requires the player to feel at least some sense of helplessness, that they might run out of ammunition any second, or won't have enough first aid kits to deal with a certain boss. Crow Country had none of that. There is already an exploration difficulty setting that practically makes dying impossible anyways, so I don't understand why the normal difficulty setting also had to be made so laughably easy. There is an increasingly annoying group of people out there who love to spout stupid nonsense like, why don't you just not use the vending machines or trash cans? Well, similar to how I expect the developers to be able to create engaging level design and puzzles, I also expect them to be able to create a satisfying level of challenge without me deliberately having to handicap myself. That's kind of their job, you know? I don't enjoy self-imposed challenge because where do you draw the line? Okay, so I don't use the vending machine or trash cans. But there is also a lot of these glass bottles containing ammo littered around the environment too. Should I just not bother collecting them either? Also, on a first playthrough, how was I supposed to know I didn't need to use the vending machines? One of them could have contained an important puzzle item I needed. Now that I have finished the game, I know that isn't the case, but I had no choice but to interact with these machines during my first playthrough, in case one of them turned out to be mandatory to story progression. Speaking of puzzles, I actually love many of the riddles sprinkled throughout these environments, especially the more challenging optional ones. They are just the right amount of challenging, and never took up a huge amount of my time trying to solve them. There are these machines that will give you the solution to many of the game's puzzles if you ever get too stuck, and honestly, they're a good inclusion. We live in the age of the internet where finding the solution to a certain puzzle can be done in a matter of seconds, so using these machines isn't breaking the game by any means. Plus, using them can actually fuck up your end game ranking, so there is an incentive to try and figure most puzzles out by yourself. Having said all that, what I'm not a fan of is giving the player the solution to a puzzle when they didn't even fucking ask for it. One of the best puzzles in the game is near the end, where you need to use a projector to solve a riddle printed on the wall. It's not a brain buster by any means, but it does require the player to at least think carefully about what they are doing, and it was one of the most enjoyable puzzles to solve in the game. However, there is a save room mere meters away that straight up just writes the solution to the puzzle on the wall. Like, what the hell? This is honestly God of War Ragnarok levels of bad. Believe it or not, I'm all for accessibility settings in games. If people are having a difficult time getting through a certain game or solving a certain puzzle, there should be settings that make the journey a little easier for them. But that's all they should be, optional settings. This shit is mandatory, and it's fucking patronising honestly. I don't know when game developers decided to treat their players like idiots, but shit like this just makes me want to stop playing the game entirely, to be honest. So I've been quite critical of Crow Country so far, but thankfully a few months ago at time of writing, the developers of Crow Country added a hard difficulty option, and to call it a game changer would be an understatement. Upon starting hard mode for the first time, it took less than 2 minutes for me to realise that Crow Country had finally become the game I had always wanted it to be from the start. Upon taking the bullets from the back of Mara's car, the ammunition simply disappears afterwards. Hooray! Actual resource management. Upon trying to check trash cans for supplies, Mara will simply refuse to stick her hand in them. Hooray, Mara's finally a normal fucking human being. And finally, you can't even use vending machines for supplies, as they are all either busted or out of order, which adds so much to this world's realism, I can't even begin to tell you. What this means is that if you run out of ammunition, guess what? You're fucked. You will simply have to avoid enemies until you find some other means of defending yourself. Using healing items now poses another question. Should you heal when you've been mildly injured, or hold out until your health is critical so that you can get the most out of your first aid kit? These questions simply did not exist in the original version of the game, as supplies were so plentiful. On top of that, all hit machines have now been destroyed, which means that you now need to figure out the solution to every puzzle by yourself. While this prohibits any Elon Musk supporters from taking on this difficulty, I appreciate its inclusion as it allows the game's puzzles to truly flourish. On top of that, the solution to the projector puzzle is no longer printed on the wall. When playing Crawl Country on hard difficulty, I noticed myself employing lateral thinking more and more throughout my playthrough. What path would I take through the park? The safest? Or the route that would save me the most time? What enemies would I choose to kill, and which would I need to run past? I also ended up using environmental traps a lot more in order to save on the amount of ammunition I was expending. Even weapons that I usually would not use became key to survival on this difficulty. On standard difficulty, I was able to use the handgun and shotgun to get through most of the game without issue. However, relying on that tactic on hard mode quickly saw me running out of ammunition entirely for those weapons. I now had to rely on other firearms that I had shunned during my initial playthroughs of the game. For example, the flamethrower has lousy range, but is an absolute powerhouse when used up close against enemies. Ammunition for the Magnum is limited, but can dispose of bigger threats in only a few shots. And when a grenade is used effectively, it can absolutely decimate an entire room full of enemies. One aspect of hard mode I do not like, however, is how the health system now works. On standard difficulty, if Mara took enough damage from enemies, she would hold her side to indicate to that she was... What the fuck? If Mara took enough damage from enemies, she would hold her side to indicate she was low on health. However, you could still sprint while low on health. On hard difficulty, however, Mara will straight up refuse to run at all if she is injured. The best she can do is limp slowly forward, making her easy prey for any nearby enemies. What this basically means is that if you have run out of ammo, you are essentially fucked, as you will not be able to move quick enough to avoid taking damage from enemies. The early Resident Evil games also did this, to be fair, but more recent entries have realised how unfair handicapping the player's movement is, and so even when injured, you are still able to run, albeit at a slightly slower pace. Aside from this little gripe, however, I can't think of any other issue I now have with Crawl Country. I cannot understate what a revelation hard mode has been for this game. I have played hundreds of survival horror games at this point. I have no issue getting the highest rank in many of them, and enjoy playing many of them at the highest difficulty possible. This is not me trying to brag, by the way. I am in no way an elite gamer, nor do I wish to be at the ripe old age of 36. But I'd like to think my experience with the genre has allowed me to distinguish between what is a true survival horror experience and what is simply labelling itself as such in order to generate hype. Crawl Country at release simply did not resemble a survival horror game to me, and that's fine, by the way. It was still a great adventure game that had a lot of stuff going for it. But with hard mode, I have no issue putting Crawl Country right up there with some of the best games in the genre. It was always a great game, but now it's downright essential.